All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by, two-time Bassmaster Elite Series champion. He is a FLW Forest Wood Cup champion, a Major League Fishing World Champion, and most recently, back-to-back Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour Angler of the Year titles. It is Mr. Jacob Wheeler. Jacob, thanks for stopping on today.
Man, I appreciate you having me on. It's always good talking bass fishing.
So let's start with obviously the elephant in the room is that you have been just torching the Bass Pro Tour. And if I want to go through, I actually wrote this down because I couldn't believe this was real. If you want to go through like stage 1 through 7 and Red Crest of this year, you had stage 1, 8th place. You had stage 2, which was down at Lake Fork, was 3rd place. Stage 3, 8th again at Lewis Smith. Red Crest, you were 3rd. Stage 4 on Lake of the Ozarks, you were 5th. Stage 5, 2nd. Stage 6, 2nd. And Stage 7 in Mille Lacs was your only finish outside of the top 10 at 11. So, I don't know. It's crazy to think of. There are 80 anglers in these tournaments in the BPT regular series, and you have 7 out of 8 main events. You're in the top 10. You only missed the top 10 by 1 place, like an 88% clip of being in the top 10. What have these past few years been like for you? Is it, I don't know, I guess deeper, is it satisfaction? Is it gratification, or is it just like fueling to push farther?
Oh man, it's sort of crazy. It's just like, I feel like, you're climbing a mountain and you just don't want to stop looking up. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like a deal where it's awesome. It pushes me every time I go out there and compete. It makes me hungrier to win, hungrier to make the cut. I love the strategy behind the sport and how much goes into every single decision. Every moment that you're out there in the water, you need to be on top of it. And I think there's just so much to it all. There's a lot of mind games. There's a lot of mental struggles that you go through. But when everything happens together and everything goes well, it's there's never a better feeling. There's never really a better feeling.
What's the difference in the boat in this type of format where you know where you stand compared to other folks versus being in the dark with a regular 5-fish limit? Like, how does that affect mentality that you are in the boat?
Well, I've always said to me, that's a huge ordeal because now I'm adjusting everything based on what I know.
Right.
I look back at tournaments that I fished in the past where I didn't have a score tracker, where I didn't have a live leaderboard, and, like fishing the Elite Series or fishing the FLW Tour. And I would be super close and I would have a 2nd place finish or 3rd or 4th. And I would go out there and I'd be like, man, I got to swing for the fence, man. I got to catch 25 pounds a day or, something like that. And little did I know I needed 17 to win. And I'm like, dang, if I would have known I needed 17 to win, I would have ran over another place I was fishing the whole time and catch 2 or 3 3-pounders. And then I could have caught 17 pounds. So I really always have looked at it like this. For me, I like the fact of knowing what's going on and making adjustments on the fly. If you look at the greats in any sport, you look at, Tom Brady, you look at LeBron James, Michael Jordan. If they're in the 4th quarter of the game and they're down, but they don't know how much they're down, how in the world do you play? How would you play basketball? How would you play football that way? And so I feel like it's just like now, for me, that is just a part of the equation. Now you're able to have so much information. You know exactly how far you're down. Hey, maybe I need to pick up a glide bait. Maybe I need to I need to catch a couple more keepers. Just whatever it is that allows you to make decisions based on the actual live leaderboard that what's happening.
It's interesting that you feel that way because I'm sure there are other folks that feel the opposite way where it's like, now that I know that I'm down X number of pounds or whatever, I'm going to change my game plan, where if I would have just stuck with what my game plan was leaving, at launch, I would have been okay. So it's interesting to see how people's minds work. And I think you're right. I think competitively as a sport, it's hard to imagine a sport where you don't know where you stand compared to your competitor 2 minutes before the event ends. So I think that's an interesting little nuance to fishing that other people don't have to deal with. But speaking of like the success that you've been on and the role that you've been on, another thing that I could see there kind of being a dichotomy on is like, I could see it going 2 ways. I could see when you're doing well, you're on top of that mountain, it can be stressful because you have this level of success that you have to maintain, or it could be, hey, I've been in the money the last 8 times. If I had a bad tournament, I have a bad tournament. It's not like I'm not going to be able to pay my electric bill next week because I'm, depending on making the cut the next week. So how does that affect you? And do you feel like there's more or less pressure on you the more success that you have?
I would definitely say more, for sure. I definitely, the more you climb the mountain, the more you do, the more consistent you get. Like if you don't win a tournament, I remember somebody saying something like, just I heard it like out of the corner of my eye. Somebody, no, a buddy of mine was fishing. And he's like, AJ Alton Jones Jr. said somebody told him, he said, "Man, why is we having such a bad year? It's a tough year so far. This is this year because last year I had a really unbelievable season. I won three events and one angler of the year and won a cup event." And so it's like crazy, everything. And so all the things I check, like checking all these boxes. And this year, I just, like early in the middle of the year, I had some really close calls, got close, but hadn't won that tournament. And so I just realized, like, when somebody said that, like, wow, Wheeler's, having a tough year. And I'm like, and, I had 4 top 10s. I'm like, dang, like it's flattering because you're like, that's what they expect. That's what someone expects of you. It's like, dang, that's what they expect. But then you're also like, dang, that's what they expect. Holy smokes. Like, how achievable is that? Like, can that even, I don't know how long that run can last. I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to, every tournament's so new, so fresh. And so that definitely gave me two different perspectives. And I think that that's something that, I mean, I try to be my hardest critic. I would say I try to always look and always out strategize and out think and try to figure out exactly how I can put myself in a good position for every single event. And sometimes you make bad decisions, but it adds a little bit more stress to it all for sure, because you're just like, what people expect of you now. Obviously nowhere near on a KVD level, but I just talked to Kevin about it. And I'm like, dude, I can't imagine. Like I've just had a couple of years. Like I can't imagine what you went through and have gone through in your career, with all the success he's had.
Yeah, you are now the New York Yankees of bass fishing, where it's like World Series or bust, right? It's like, oh, you didn't win last week? How dare you not win stage 6? What are you doing? Like, you had a bad week. It's like, no, I finished second. What are you talking about? That's a good point, I guess, right? One of the I think I pair this back to like an Aaron Martins. Like an Aaron Martins was so dominant, and while yes, he had what I think it was 11 wins, basically something like that. He had 9, 10, 11 wins, but he also had 12 or 13 seconds. He had 10 third place finishes. Like he had the second places in the Bassmaster Classic. Like that is what you look at as a body of work and you say, okay, that's greatness. It's not just catching, lightning in a bottle and saying, okay, I had a couple tournaments that played to my strengths and I won. It's no, you hung up just as many seconds and thirds. Those are tournaments that if there was 1, 2, 3 pounds difference, legacy changes if there's 1 or 2 or 3 fish. So I think that's the difference between, like I said, casual fan versus someone that may dig a little deeper, is like, no, a second place or a third place finish should factor into how you look at an angler and their overall success.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, and you always look at individuals as closers as well. Like you try to like, oh man, that guy's a closer. Like if he gets a lead, he's going to be tough to beat. Sort of thing. But I mean, I think every part of it matters, and you look at it like in the last couple of years, this year alone, I put more emphasis on trying to win Angler of the Year. I feel like that's the war to me. Like that's the war. That's the year-long war that I have, and a tournament's a battle. So I have to like put myself in a good position every battle to where I can win the war. So like that's how I look at it. That was my goal, and that might change in years to come. Like where I just say, look, like I'm gonna swing a little bit harder and not jeopardize a few points, maybe Angler of the Year, but like I'm going to try to do this and jeopardize this and try to win this one a little bit differently. Not saying I didn't do that this year. I'm just saying there are scenarios, decisions made definitely that you're like, I could probably gain 10 more points by doing this, or I could do this and fall on my face. Let's go with this. And then I'm lost, so there's sometimes you have to play it that way.
Yeah, it depends on what the end goal is, right? And yeah, if you're sitting in 40th place in the AOI points, then yeah, you're going to swing for the fences a little bit more. And that's the other thing. It's like none of that nuance comes across when you're just looking at the standings of stage 6 or what. All you see is first, second, third. You don't think about, oh, this person was playing for second or third. And yes, they probably could have gone and chased a different school or, ran across the lake or done something, but they didn't. They wanted to play for a bigger end goal than just what you're seeing on this web page for this day for the standings of this event.
Yeah, I thought it was one that was really interesting. Like when you talk about Angler of the Year battles, Edwin Evers and Aaron Martins had a battle. I don't know, it was 15 or whatever, maybe 16 or 13, 14, somewhere there. I was somewhere in there. And it was the last tournament was on St. Clair. And Edwin had a lead and Aaron was behind him and he had to win and put himself in a position. So Edwin takes it and says, all right, well, I'm going to stay safe. I'm going to fish St. Clair. I'm not going to let my, hey, mechanical issues or anything kill me for my Angler of the Year chance. Aaron went the exact opposite because he was behind and ran 80 miles to Lake Erie. And Aaron comes back and almost wins the tournament. I think he ended up breaking a bolt, but he wins the Angler of the Year and almost wins the tournament or almost wins the tournament. I forget exactly what went down, but regardless, he wins Angler of the Year because he's like, now when you're the hunted, it's a little bit of a different vibe, a different feeling. Sometimes when you're on top, you're like, man, I'm good. You don't necessarily get complacent, but you're just trying to protect your league. And it's just like anything else in NFL football, or you're playing prevent, and all of a sudden you're giving gaps open, and you're just like, you're not playing your game. So it's always interesting how those that little change in whether you're behind or up can make your decision making a little bit differently.
So at this point, right, you have back-to-back Bass Pro Tour Angler of the Years. You had I think, third place finish in 2020, which was a weird year for everybody. And then the year before that, 2019, I think you were third or fourth. So you've been up there this whole time. So I guess a little higher end question. Do you ever think of, at this point, I guess in your career, ever think of legacy? Like, do you ever think of, it's weird. I don't know how to explain this, except I can't think of any other sport where you have had what we had over the past couple of years, where you have a sport that is united, that has a top echelon of competition, and then it fractures, and you have half of it go this way, half of it go this way, and someone goes to the new fracture of that with a totally different set of rules, totally different scoring, totally different everything, and dominates that new one after being successful in the old one. Like, I can't think of any situation where the game is completely changed and someone has gone and dominated the new one. Like, does it ever trip you out a little bit that we might be in uncharted territory with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm not even, to be honest with you, I don't even think about it for the most part. I just sort of go with, to me, tournament bass fishing. And there is strategy. It all changes depending on format. If you're fishing for 5 and every fish counts, but really it only changes not a whole lot. It really only changes when you're going to places that have a plentiful number of bites. So I feel like since the 2016 Fish the FLW Tour, I made I think my first top 10 in points that year, and every other year since then I've been fortunate to make a top 10 in points, whether it's 5 or every fish count. So to me, it's just sort of a deal. Like, it's just, if you're fishing good, you're making good decisions. It takes a time in this sport to I think it takes a lot of time in this sport as an angler to mature and to grow. And you see that, like, even if you look at Polinick having his success, always early on, he was like, oh, that guy's going to swing for the fence, and that's how he fishes. And I just never looked at Polinick growing up like he was going to be an Angler of the Year contender, but he's learned from mistakes, and then all of a sudden is where he's at now, winning multiple Angler of the Years. And I think that's sort of like, when you get to that point, you get, it takes a while. Like, you can see an angler like growing, and they're like 25, 26, 27, 28, and you're like, man, that guy's just, he doesn't have, and all of a sudden he clicks to another gear, and you're like, holy smokes. So no, but I mean, I'm going off a little bit on the tangent side, but I mean, that's it's interesting. It's just interesting. It's interesting. Definitely, formats definitely play a role into it, but I felt like it hasn't played too much. I definitely think there's a little bit more strategy, and it's easier to separate yourself in every fish counts format, where 5 over 4 days, it's able to work that way. But you have to have a little bit, sometimes depending on the fishery, a little bit of luck of that one big bite to make that difference.
So last question on BPT, and then we'll obviously move on to some fishing talk here. But I thought it was interesting. Like, today I was looking at the Major League Fishing website, and they have a poll up right now where they're asking fans what format they would like to see on the BPT. And your two options are always every scoreable fish counts, or a 5 fish limit where it's immediate release still, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to put you in the weird situation of like, which one would you rather see, but which one do you think plays to your intangible strengths better? You've had success in both, obviously. Which one do you think favors you as an angler?
I think it's easier to have a separation. I look at a 5 fish limit as a restrictor play racing. You're restricted how much you can, you know what I'm saying? It keeps everybody closer to a naked eye. Every fish counts, you go. And you can't have a bad, you can have a bad fish. You can have a bad day and make it up in the next day and just be killing it, you know, and get clicking and win the tournament. So it's man, I love them both. I think the biggest thing that I have an issue with right now, it's not even an issue, it's just something that I feel bad for, is there's not a lot of people that fish weekend tournaments, and it's all still 5 fish tournaments. So that's just what I mean. That's what I do when I get home. I fish 3 fish dog fight tournaments at Chickamauga, and I enjoy the heck out of them. Man, that's always I enjoy. It doesn't matter if it's 3 fish, 5 fish, every fish counts. I love tournament bass fishing. So I think that the tournament on the every fish count side, it's been tough because the endemic fan has not been able to relate directly to decision making, especially in the tournaments where you have plentiful numbers of bites. Now, Grand Lake, you get 8 bites in a day. You know, it's the same decision making. I'm running around fishing the exact same way I would fish a 5 fish limit tournament to a T. When you have, you know, when you're only getting 5 to 10 bites in a day, it's the exact same way I would play the 5 fish limit tournament. But it changes when you go up north when you have a lot of bites. So I think that's really the biggest separation side of it. I think man, I don't know, because the last 3 tournaments I fished in a 5 fish limit tournament, professional events, super tournaments, I got first, second, and second in those tournaments. So I don't really have a, I don't think it's one thing. I do feel like, even talking to Dustin, we talk about it, DC, he won 3 tournaments this year. I feel like you look at myself, and you look at Dustin in this format right now, in the every fish counts format. And I think we're able to separate ourselves a little bit more than maybe you would see on a traditional 5 fish limit tournament. And I think I like that, because you're able to, it's all strategy. There, you cut out the luck factor of it. If you freaking just catch them, you catch them, and you dial it in. So, I mean, they're all up there. I love them both. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm 50-50 on them. I love them both. I think that I would love to see it where some of the anglers across the country could fish in this format long term, you know, at some point in time and experience it. It's completely different than bringing them in a live well. I think the tough thing, you know, for me, I think there's some things on both sides that we can learn from. You know, and it's like, you know, there's like things, even just putting them in a live well, it seems so archaic to me right now, just because of what I've done over the last few years of weighing them in. But it's not realistic for a weekend guys fishing a weekend tournament, that's the only option he has, to go bring him in and weigh him there with his club with a,
you can have a marshal on every boat for a
do that
Tuesday nighter.
Like,
yeah.
I also look at, like, you know, what's flawed is like how I know like the tournament that you know, there's been tournaments won and lost by dead fish penalties. And it's like, dude, I hate to sit there and just baby fish and putting ice in there. I mean, I do it all the time. You have to. That's part of your job at that point in time, is sitting there and just making sure your fish are alive and they're healthy and they're ready to go. It makes it so much better to take them off the deal and just put them back in the lake. It feels so much better. So, I mean, there's both sides of it. I mean, it's tough because I'm really divided on it, because I think that you know, tournament bass fishing to me is tournament bass fishing, but there definitely is some differences. And it's just like they both have my heart. I mean, I grew up fishing for 5 fish, and I love that. And I love fishing for every fish count. So it's tough. I don't know. I don't even know I don't know the perfect answer on that.
Okay, so would there be a situation where you would like us to see a season where you do both, or is that just too much, where you're like the bouncing back and forth mentally of going from 5 fish to every fish counts to 5 fish to every fish counts in different tournaments in the same season would just be too much?
So personally, I would like that to happen, because I think that would be the best way to do it. I think people are tired of live scope smallmouth events. Hell, I'm tired of seeing them. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm tired. My neck's tired of seeing them. I don't want to. So like, you know, like for instance, we're going to Saginaw Bay next year. And so, like, I think it would be so amazing to have that tournament be an every fish counts tournament, because there you go. It's largemouth for the most part. Probably 7 of the top 10 would be largemouth. You're going to have guys swim jigging, frogging, flipping, which that's what we want to see. Like I'm seeing a guy stare down there and cast out there until we can actually see the screen exactly what he's doing and all that. I don't think there's a separation, you know, to a lot of the fans. So I think, to me, I like, you know, Andy Morgan made a top 10 at St. Clair fishing for largemouth. So did Wesley Strader last year. Like those are the things that I think it's so great to see guys exploit. Like it gets to be the same old, same old. Like you watch the Elite Series event up on like the St. Lawrence River, or you watch our event on I'm trying to think, like even Mille Lacs. It's the same. You're staring down there, you're casting out there, drop shot. I caught him on this. I was using this nose hook or this Nico hook, and it's nothing really new or fresh. I just feel like it's just like you're just got to be efficient, and that's how the game is. I personally would like more tournaments where I'm like, hey, look, I just got to fish by the seat of my pants. And those largemouth events, I think if you did a poll, people would they would enjoy that. If you go to St. Lawrence River and you could fish for largemouth, half of them are fishing for largemouth, and half your top tens fishing for smallmouth, and every fish counts format, in my opinion, is way more entertaining to watch than a five fish at that point in time. But then there's times where, hey, I could see it the other way. You go to Smith Lake where there's tons of fish. I want to see a guy fish for five because I want to see how he's going to adjust after he catches five spotted bass for 12 pounds, and he's sitting there and he knows he needs to catch one big largemouth to win the tournament. So you can play it both ways, but I think that's why for me personally, I don't know what the fans would say, but for me personally, that's why I would like a split, because I don't think there's a perfect format in bass fishing right now. And I think a combination would be sort of neat.
Well, if the front page of MajorLeagueFishing.com is any indication, we might see some changes sometime soon. Who knows? Okay, so let's transition a little bit to actually fishing techniques. And the first question I had, so you're a Midwestern guy. I don't know if there are probably going to be some people that are listening to this that don't know where you're from or know your background. You are an Indy guy. You're from Indianapolis, Indiana. You cut your teeth here in the Midwest. What did you cut your teeth fishing? Obviously, over in Indy, I know we talked about it before we started. There's Eagle Creek Reservoir, there's Morse, there's Geist. So where did you cut your teeth? Was it on those inland reservoirs, or was it on the White River, or where did you start fishing at?
Yeah, so like for me, it really came down to I didn't have a boat early on in teenage years. I fished a lot of like high school type events. There were junior tournaments back then, which they had no boaters as well. If you could jump in, and fish. And so that's sort of how I started fishing, like Glen Flint, Waveland, Geist when I could a little bit. And my uncle, he fished in club tournaments as well. He had a skeeter at that point in time, and I jumped in his boat quite a bit. And he just always let me sort of tag along with him, which he put a lot of time. My dad fished the club tournaments every once in a while as well. And so I just learned a lot from all of that. And then about when I was 16 or 15 years old, I met two gentlemen. One was Brian Wallman, one was Brian Johnson. I knew Brian earlier on than that, about 13, and then Brian Wallman, I've known him a little, but they really took me under their wing and taught me. And I really learned a lot about electronics from Brian. He's a very computer tech savvy guy, 2D understanding stuff. I mean, I'll tell you how good Brian was. Before Lake Master, before any of this stuff, he had the Dr. Depth program, and he was out on these lakes. He was out on these lakes getting the topo of them, and he had all the this is before all that stuff was like mainstream. And so we would have like 1 foot contours on all these lakes because he would go out there and do it himself.
And no one else would have them.
No one else would have that stuff. They just have lines on avionics. And so like that's where I sort of learned the tech side of things from Wallman. He was really smart on that. And then Brian was more meat and potatoes, buzzbait jig, flip with the buzzbait. That's how it's going to work, So it was really cool. Those two guys really played a big role in my life and sort of cutting my teeth. And so that was sort of the start of it all. Like White River played a huge. I would say White River, Morse, and Geist were the top three, and then Waveland. And what's sort of interesting is like you think of Indiana, you don't think of like the best bass fishing in the country by any means. It's sort of like Ohio. Like we are not in the best bass fishing in the country by any means. But hey, we have some good fisheries mixed in there. And so, but the cool thing is like, even in Indiana, there's places that those fish group up out offshore, and you could target fish offshore. And I can learn that. There's shallow water fish, of course. So then you had a little combination of all. Now, I didn't really have the smallmouth idea. I didn't understand smallmouth that well, but I had river fishing in the White River. So I really had a lot grass fishing on Geist, more of it rock related. And on Morris, Doc Rocks on Morris. So you had a really good combination of multiple different things going on where it allowed me to be a little bit more diverse. And I remember so many people telling me, like, you need to go fish Monroe, you need to go fish Patoka. If you're ever going to get anywhere in this sport and get to the next level, you need to fish the lakes that all the big tournaments are on, which was true. But the problem was those Ohio River and stuff like that. The problem was those tournament lakes that literally a guy would get like three bites would be in the top 10 in a BFL. So you could never, ever even get to the point where you could learn a new technique because you take a swim bait out there. You throw it all day, you don't even get a bite. How do you know? How do you have any confidence in that at all if you're fishing a body of water that you can barely even catch? You catch 3 fish and you're in the top 10 in a BFL. So I think those are the things. I think I was very fortunate to grow up in Indy where the Blakes were actually fairly decent and they had some quality fish, and it sort of allowed me. It was sort of I go on these big rants, but that's yeah, that's the deal that I feel like allowed. I mean, it was definitely the proving grounds to really allow me to at least get some confidence and have enough to really sort of just push me out there on tour and at least being able to see a little bit.
Yeah, and the interesting part of watching you on tour is like you are now I would probably call you a power fisherman, like to the bone. Like you're a power guy, which is almost an oxymoron around here because around here I am and a lot of my friends and a lot of people that are in these parts of the country, like you say, that are not the best bass fisheries in the world, where we have to kind of dink around a little bit with Ned rigs and finesse jigs and, my little Rico popper and my shaky head and all those type of things. It's like, but you've kind of, at least when I watch you on tour, and you're fishing places that allow you to do that. So that's obviously different too. But I think my big question is, if you're going to grow up in a place like the Midwest where fishing is tough, do you think that's an advantage or a disadvantage when then you grow up and you end up competing with guys that grew up on Fork and Gunnersville? Do you think it's an advantage growing up fishing in a tougher place or not?
Okay, so I think it's actually a disadvantage for the most part. I think it is because I think, again, sort of going back to what I said, you can't generate enough bites to really learn techniques at a faster rate. So I think that's a tough thing. I think that's my biggest issue with it. That's why I like it's tough. Like it's tough fishing. And so you're not able to learn at a fast pace because you can't generate enough bites to learn those techniques that way. Like, I mean, YouTube has been great for learning new techniques. I mean, even going to ponds, that's what I did that a lot growing up as well to learn techniques. I think now that being said, when you go to a tough fishery in an event, which it happens at times, normally about 1 or 2 tournaments a year, we'll have those tournaments where you're just like, dude, this is not setting up. It's got a flood coming through here. There ain't water. You can see down this much all over the lake. I mean, clear water is 1.5 inches of visibility. Or, dude, if I can get 2 bites, I'll be happy. Now that is when that fundamental where you grew up and you knew, like, dude, that's how I fish. Like, you can just you turn that gear back to when you grew up.
Yeah, it's that grittiness. Yeah.
We're good. We'll flip down through here. We'll get 2 bites today and we'll get paid. And we're going to push that. And if we get 5 bites, we'll win the tournament. So it's just that grittiness of that. So there's an advantage in those tough events. But I've always said that, like, it's tough for an Ohio angler, an Indiana angler to go to Michigan or some of these places that have plentiful numbers of fish. And they get there and like, dude, I got a limit. Yeah.
It's like, that's not going to do it.
No, you don't understand. Like,
it's a different world now. Yeah.
Not what that's not like, that's not how it works. So yeah, it's definitely different. And I think there's advantages to both, but that's why I said, like, I think it's tough. And I think that's a big reason why you don't see big numbers of professional anglers coming out of those places, because they're not able to learn at that fast of a rate.
Yeah, that's fair too. My dumb brain goes to you're a kid in a candy store. Like you said, when you go to these fisheries, when you go to the St. Lawrence River, you're like, oh, this is what fishing for smallmouth is supposed to be like. This is what, when God created smallmouth fishing, this is what he had in mind, not me in a knee-deep creek in farm country fishing for the 3 fish that live in this half-mile stretch.
Oh, I know. That's what's tough is, like, because I feel like the biggest problem with like a lot of our fisheries around the country, around at least in the Midwest, is it becomes like a big deal, like on release areas, because there's so little numbers of fish. release areas become a huge player. And so that's really like and it hurts you even more because now all you're spending all your time is fishing for release fish, and you're not actually going out there and patterning them. You're just fishing 50 yards down the bank from the ramp, and you're dragging her out and generating a couple bites. And it's like, okay, look, I had a good tournament. And you're like, how is that going to translate to you winning a tournament on Gunnersville? It's
It's
not.
not. Yeah.
And so those are the things that I think fundamentally I'm like, yes, you won the tournament, but it's I mean, if they go like it's that's why I say what I say. I'm like I just feel like and there's advantages, like I said, there's advantages too as well. But that's the reason behind it. As I thought about it and looked at it, and yeah, I mean, there's tough tournaments all over the country. You're gonna have that no matter what.
So, last question, being from Indiana, folks that are listening to this show right now are going to recognize a name of a company that you worked with back in the day and have a long history with, and that is American Legacy Fishing. So we obviously work with ALF here on the show. Can you, I guess, key folks in a little bit on your relationship with ALF and Brian and everybody over there? If you go back in the YouTube vault, you can find some videos of like you in the shop 10 years ago talking to Brian after winning the Forest Wood Cup and stuff. So can you key us a little bit on that relationship?
Yeah, man, I got nothing but great things to say about that career over there. Tom and Brian and all those guys, man, they work really hard. I still talk to them quite a bit. They're good friends, and sort of like starting off my career, they gave me an opportunity. My first year fishing the FLW tour, they're like, hey, look, Tom was like, look, I'm gonna look out for you. We're gonna do this thing, and we're gonna be a partnership. We're gonna figure this thing out, and we're gonna help you set you up. I didn't have anything. I was very fortunate. Rapple was on board at that point in time. And I think I had a contract there. Then I had a small contract. I had a Fatheads eyewear contract. Probably chill. My pup out here. And so then I'm like, but then I had American Legacy Fishing Company, and they were like, look, we're going to look out. And Tom and Brian, and Brian was young. He was, close age to where I was at. And I'm like, man, it's cool. It's great. And I was able to fish with all this great equipment. And without them, I couldn't have been where I was at. I mean, you see me with like, NRXs fishing like in the Forest Wood Cup, and that was just because of them, and that I wouldn't have been able to afford that at that point in time in my career. And so I have a lot. I sent them a jersey last year. I sent one from back and just told them I really appreciate everything. And because I just realized how much, there's a lot of people out there that need that opportunity. And you need to sort of give that opportunity if you can, if you're able to do so. So I think that I have a lot of gratitude to them. And they're just a great company overall.
That's awesome. And yeah, I would echo that. Like they've kind of done the same thing with me and with this show too. They make it possible when it probably wouldn't be possible otherwise. So, and the whole idea of like a somewhat small Midwestern tackle company, like that seems like something that's just, it's starting to go more and more by the wayside. And I love the fact that there's folks like that are still out there that you can call up and you can ask them, hey, what taper of NRX would be best for this, right? You're not just a number on a spreadsheet to these people. You can actually have a little bit of that back and forth tackle shop type thing that I just wish we still had more of. I miss that growing up, of like your old local tackle shops with the folks that went in there and they'd shoot the bull with you for 2 hours.
There is something with that. There's no doubt about that. There's something to it. There's and they do take the time. They know their stuff. I mean, they fish. They know everything about it. And it's like, look, if there's something that you need, this is what you need. They do a good job of that.
Cool. So the next thing and the last thing we do here is obviously we want to talk tackle. It's tackle talk, and we want to dive down some techniques here. So the interesting thing is we've had folks on before, like if we had Rick Clunn on before, and you obviously talked poppers with Rick Clunn. If you had Denny Brower on, you talked jigs. The thing with you that's interesting is you're so versatile that I would like to hear from you, I guess, on what you identify as a personal strength or techniques that you feel more confident than others with.
So like I started like my love for one particular technique is like goes back to early like teenage, 8 years old. Like, I mean, and I think there's so many people that are like this already that love the same thing. Is topwater fishing is probably my number one thing that I've always sort of hung my hat on. I feel like I've spent more time and more money over the years trying to perfect my arsenal in topwaters. Which number one, I love, obviously. I mean, who doesn't love a fish coming up there and blowing up on a buzz bait or a walking bait or a popper, whatever. It's unbelievable. But it's like, to me, that is something that there's so many little nuances when this one's good and when that's better, and so like I love dialing that in. Now, I don't get to use a top water nearly as much as I like to, but when I'm home and in the fall, is a great time to throw top water. So it's interesting because I've there's a lot. So top water fishing is probably my number one if I'm like locking myself into one category.
Okay, so then take these four lures that I'm about to tell you and rank them in terms of what's your favorite to throw. I would say popper, spook, buzzbait, frog.
I would say buzzbait, frogs, spook, poppers, probably how I would rank them. Uh, Versatility aspect on the frog and the buzzbait. So I can throw a buzzbait out offshore or like on offshore grass, but I also can skip it up underneath the dock. So like those are the things that I look for when I'm like picking something. It's like, again, trying to be as versatile as I can be with my selection. And then you catch spotted bass, largemouth, you know, smallmouth will bite a buzzbait. Trust me, it's crazy. They actually bite the heck out of it. I've seen it happen several days. It's some fun days in the water. So, but then and then and a frog is you can use it more open water, shade pockets, um, a spook and a walking bait in general. For me, it's really good in the fall. It's really good this time of year. And it's just good to drawing from fish from a long. I sort of look at it as like it's a top water glide bait is what it is, but they actually bite it better than a glide bait. Um, and so I mean, there's times I mean, I'm literally getting ready to go to Murray for this Team USA thing uh, down there, and I'll have like five of them tied up. So, I'll have probably five different kinds and just different little subtleties, and you just don't know what they're going to bite. So, and then a popper, like I don't throw it as much, like little small poppers and stuff like that, a little bit different. Then probably I used them a lot more probably back at the house back in the day, when I was trying to just generate a few bites. Now I throw them, but then I throw like there, but then there's like nuances within a popper too. You have a chugging popper, like a spitting popper, then you have like a walking popper, and there's just so you go on and on and on. I mean, there's just like there's popping frogs, there's little walking frogs, there's mat frogs, there's so much to it, but that's why I love it. Like I literally have like mat frogs, baby frogs. I have like 5 boxes of every for frogs. I have 5 boxes for poppers. I have 10 boxes for walking baits. I only have 1 box for buzz baits, but it's a little bit more simplistic. But yeah, that's. I mean, dude, it's top water. That's fun.
Okay, so answer me this. So I've gotten arguments with people about this before. So buzzbait, you obviously throw a lot of buzzbaits. You like throwing buzzbaits. Is there a situation where you will throw a buzzbait, or do you think there's anything wrong with throwing a buzzbait on fluoro?
No, I actually used to throw a buzzbait a lot on 4.0. I actually like I don't see. So the problem is so many people think that a buzzbait. Um, so like the problem is a lot of people are misled a little bit with the fact that mono, oh well, mono stretches, but there's no stretch in fluorocarbon. A lot of the fluorocarbon and the mono have very similar, not maybe a little bit less stretch, but and so I don't necessarily like fluorocarbon. Um, the biggest problem with throwing fluorocarbon is in monofilament is long casts. It's your stretch. But if you're really bad about setting the hook on fish and like jerking it out of their mouth, you need to be throwing mono or fluorocarbon. You have to. Like it helps you, allows you to let that you just have a split second longer. I throw braid on most all my stuff now, but there's times when I like the feel of a fluorocarbon to skip something or like to roll cast or to pitch. It doesn't cut into itself. So there's value. Like I'll pitch a buzzbait around on like little like pitch it on little laydowns and stuff but you have like if you're throwing braid, you have to realize that sucker bites it. You better like you got it. Like you have no stretch. So your hook set of to go into
Yes,
swinging.
leaning into it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not cracking them. So you have to switch it. If you're really bad about that, then you definitely want to switch it up and stick with a fluorocarbon or a monofilament. The monofilament will keep it up a little bit better. So that's something too. And I went to a line called Tritanium, which is it's made by Advanced Mono, and then Tritanium is made by Suffix, and I sort of go back and forth on it. So this Advanced Suffix is like a really like a it's a mono that has this really like not much stretch. And so I started playing with that, and that's legit. So like I throw a lot of my top waters when I'm not throwing braid, when I want just a little bit of stretch. That's where I throw it on. So it works.
Interesting. Yeah, it's the same thing. Like one, I'll do it out of utility and laziness because I'll have a regular fluoro setup with me and I'll just tie a buzzbait on it. But two, it's like the buzzbait is floating because of line tension, not because of the floating properties of your line. And so you've got your high point of rod tip and you've got your low point of buzzbait. And as long as you've got a even somewhat slight incline there, like you're fine. It's just, you're right. I have a problem with knee-jerk reactions, even if I know that I need to wait a second. If you're sitting there and you've gone 45 minutes without a bite and it's instinct, it just happens sometimes.
Or
so yeah,
4 hours.
It helps. Yeah, right. So I think it's one of those things where people think, oh, I can't throw fluoro for top waters at all. It's like, no, you can, just certain ones, right? I wouldn't throw it.
You don't want to throw it for a walking.
Yeah, you don't throw it for a walking bait. You don't throw it for a frog. Obviously there's.
You can throw it on a popper. And you can throw it on a bait.
Yep.
I think Matt Lee actually throws his on fluoro. He's like popping style baits on fluoro.
Interesting.
And NBJ actually, he started doing that as well. He's like, dude, it's freaking awesome. I'm like, hey, good. And I think there is times like your casting is better if you're like one of those. You can be better if you just a preference of like, hey, fluorocarbon's a better feel for you. You can cast on those a buzz bait or a popping style bait. You can cast it better. Then if it works better for you and you're just a more efficient caster, that's another reason to try to keep it that way.
Okay, so let's switch gears here. So it's fall. We are in full blown fall at this point over here. If you're on a normal lake, like let's say Midwestern lake, it's 8 to 15 foot, cloudy October day, just normal day. What baits are you making sure in your box on just a normal run of the mill fall day?
So I just it was funny because I was talking to MBJ about this. I said, listen, the falls can be very simple. You can keep it simple, but there's some nuances in the fall as well. One of the biggest thing that changes everything in the fall is small bait. So what happens typically is you have that year's hatch of small shad. So they're just got to where they're juvenile shad. They're small, and they're thread fins. They could be gizzards, but people call them thread fins. They call them all these small little bait fish. And if the bass are really keen on them, that can be a tough bite. It's very difficult to generate the bites from there's a lot of the bass where you throw smaller little crankbaits. I've been throwing like little small shad wraps this time of year and catch them really good. I've caught them on like that little flat side, like that, like Ott's little tiny. Like I always want a crankbait, either I'm gonna have like a flat side, like that tiny is a unbelievable little crankbait for like somebody that's looking to try to imitate that smaller baits. It's a little bit smaller. You can still cast it on like a casting rod. But it runs about 3.5, like, which is great because a lot of fish getting around flats this time of year. So that's like a really good little bait. It actually runs over wood really well. It has a small lip, but runs over wood pretty well and doesn't get hung up. So I'm always gonna have like a flat side / square bill ready to roll for this time of year, of course. Another bait that I'm actually, obviously a buzz bait. I've caught bass on a buzz bait. This is the one thing people sometimes forget. In the fall, you're going from warmer temps down to some cooler temps. And I've caught them on a buzzbait as cold as water, being 48 degrees. They're as it gets colder and colder, their only goal is to eat, to feed up for the wintertime. They know it's getting colder. And there's times, especially on lakes that have drawdowns, where there's not a lot of cover available, slow crawl on a buzzbait, rod tip up, choo, 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 choo. I mean, I've got a lot of big ones throughout the years on a buzzbait, slow crawling it, and you get to slow it down, but it just and the same thing if your water's a little clear. A wake bait is phenomenal as far as if they're not really wanting to bite like a walking bait.
Yeah,
Wake bait can absolutely T-bone. They do not play with that. It's unbelievable. Like there's a BX wake and minnow that I throw on schooling fish a lot of times in the fall around here, and everybody's throwing spooks and walking baits out on Chickamauga, and I'll throw that little BX wake and minnow, and I can cast it a mile, and it just, and you're like, oh, that's a decent one. It comes up, it's like 5 pound. You're like, holy smokes, they slurp it. So that's something. A vibrating jig you can't go wrong with. A chatterbait just catches them and just it is what it is. And then you need some sort of flipping bait. So you need a couple top waters. A spinner bait's a good bait as well in the fall, like smaller blades. So Accent, a company that I work with, makes some like a small spinner bait. It's called a River Special, but they have fluted blades. Okay, so not they're fluted blades which don't have as much resistance as a normal like flat blade. It has more flash and doesn't have much resistance. So you still could have like a 4.5, but it doesn't have as much thump, which then imitates that smaller bait, which therefore, you can generate those bites a little bit easier. So I think that's definitely one. And then I would say a jig or a flipping bait of some kind. I prefer a jig most of the time, but if I'm fishing in Ohio, I might be picking up like a small crawl or something. Or, that's, it depends. I like a jig just as versatility wise, hanging on there and skipping around, sleep underneath boat docks and stuff. But if I'm flipping around wood and stuff, it might be a little bit different.
Yeah, we just actually did an episode about like slow crawling smaller baits in the fall time. And this is actually this is a little Ohio juice around here. Like this is a 3-inch micro buzz bait, no skirt, screw lock. Like you just put a little 3-inch grub and you just crawl it so slow and just get walloped.
That's actually a big deal. Yeah, that's a good deal.
Yeah.
I got plenty. I don't have those, but I have something like that. Yeah, I throw that. That's a very good technique for the fall when they're on a small bait, because you want that blade size matters. So that blade just, and just hard to keep that one up and slow crawl him. But he's like, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So you hinted at spinnerbaits too, which is obviously, when I think of fall, I think like quintessential fall bait to me is a spinnerbait. Like spinnerbait, again, that small profile, but also small ball of bait that you can get up shallow, that you can have these fish just capitalize on and go after a little bigger target with it still looking like the small profile that you want. So spinnerbaits, I know you hinted at different blades and things that you'll throw. What about trailer hooks versus just a trailer on it with no trailer hook?
So for me, I have gone to where I almost exclusively throw trailers on my spinner baits and buzz baits all the time, because I feel like I've done some tests and just sort of played around with it a little bit. I just feel like the fish get it so much better. It gives them something to actually engulf and hold on to. So I prefer a actual spinner bait with that trailer on it most of the time. There is some times in the fall, but the big thing about the fall is you want to really trim your skirt up high. So like if I'm trying to imitate that smaller bait, compact bait, a lot of times what will happen is I'll have these small blades, but then you have this big giant skirt dangling down, and then you have your hook. Then it's like 2 inches from the skirt, or skirt's dangling 2 inches below that. Yeah, you're going to miss some fish. So I'll go to where like I'm cutting it right there. Typically what I'll do is I'll cut it right there at that hook, at the bottom of the hook, cut it off. Then I'll put a trailer. And so if I'm imitating small bait, I might put like a little small, like fluke style trailer on there. To where, or something, a small swim bait that doesn't have a lot of resistance against it. Something just small profile that matches up with it. And so then I have the trailer sort of out there doing its thing because the skirt's not overpowering it. And I do that on the buzzbait as well. I'd want to really trim him up and get him like finesse version of that. Compact, sort of like what you were saying. So that's really a big deal for me in the fall. Like I try to do that a lot more and allow the trailer to do a little bit of the action and show off a little bit more.
That's a good point. Going to more toward like a fluke versus, I think a lot of people get hung up and they just throw like 3/8 ribbed swim baits on the back, like the big paddle tails. Like that's not always the answer to throw on the back of a chatterbait, on the back of a spinner bait, right?
I don't like a swim bait on the back of a chatterbait at all. I don't even throw it. I just don't throw. I want every once. I mean, like probably less than 5% of the time do I throw that. I just for me, it's interesting. I feel like a chatterbait. The reason it's so good is it tracks and it loses its deal and just kicks out. It's sort of like a hunting crankbait. So if you put a swim bait on there, it'll start to trap true, and it'll lose that. So that's why, like, to me, like I mean, not, now sometimes in Florida where I want stability a little bit, sometimes I'll use a paddle tail swim bait, but most of the time I don't. Most of the time I want something straight, like in like a fluke style of some kind. I have a few. I throw like 3 or 4 depending on the scenario, like straight narrow trailers, but they have more action, less action accordingly. But yeah, but then on a spinner bait, it's a little different because the spin bait does help it. But then you gotta, it's like it is like, but a spinner bait, you can even like the old school like twin tail deal, like the not the twin tail club, but like the twin tail like little like Zoom made one, like, and like that catches good. Like it just adds a little bit of just action, back there. So like when that blade,
those were the things that used to come with chatterbaits, right? Like the little the little squigglies, the double squiggly things,
I mean, oh yeah, 100%. Like, well, Hank Parker's like spinnerbait, classic spinnerbait, whatever. It comes with like a chartreuse one of those. Like put it on the back of there, you fire it out there. I don't know if it really adds anything to it, but I'm like, hey, yeah. I mean, I've caught a lot of bass on chatterbait back in the day on that too. I think he called it. I don't even know what they called that. Like,
I don't either, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, the old school little double squiggly. What about rod choice for spinnerbaits and chatterbaits? Are you one of those guys that likes like a glass cranking rod type deal, or do you like a stout fast action? Like, what are you looking for?
So for me, I want a parabolic rod for sure.
Okay, same.
I I feel like I've played around with glass all over the place and played around with a graphite composite, but I've not ever found the right rod. Um, so I keep it really simple. Like I have a 7 foot medium heavy that I actually throw all my buzz baits on, all my walking baits on, all my small spinner baits on. When I'm skipping docks, it's a vibrating jig, same thing. Like it's like it works for all those things, and I'm getting used to it. And my hook set is changed a little bit depending on where what I'm. So like I got a sort of system for that. And then I have a 7.3 medium heavy that's a little bit heavier of an action that it doesn't have as much of that parabolic bend. And so I use that for more when I'm casting around grass flats because I have more leverage, but then I have a little bit less of that parabolic bend where I'm able to pick up that line and really drive that hook home. So I don't get too crazy with it. I think rod action can be a big deal. I'm not very big on fast actions throughout. I like a more of a moderate throughout a lot of my rods, and I just feel like that to me, whether I'm flipping, I lose the least amount of fish with a moderate action rod over the years, and it's something that I've had to figure out, and I've lost plenty of them, but that's what works for me, and that's my hook set. I don't set the hook overly hard. But then, buddies of mine like love a fast action, and I'm like, dude, I don't know how you get away with that. So it really just depends on the angler a little bit. But I do also, but the one thing I will say, using more of a graphite rod and not being big on the graphite composite or just a glass rod, if I am losing fish or missing fish, and I'm setting the hook, because the one issue that you do have with a chatterbait, and the reason why people use a glass rod is because they wind into them, they bite it, and your blade will get clamped down, and then it pops open. It pops open and pops your mouth open, and then your hook point comes in, and just basically, if you're winding and it loads up, it just locks up in the top of their mouth. Where if you got a graphite rod and bite it, and you set the hook, that blade pops open so fast at the same point in time as that pops up, it blows your mouth open, and then that bait comes out there so quickly. So I think that's the big reason why people use that so much. But I also throw mono on a chatterbait a lot because of that. And if you're missing fish, you put some mono on there, and with a graphite rod, and that fish bites it, you don't have that direct connect as much as some of the fluorocarbon. It's similar, but it's not as much. And to me, that's what I'm using. Like I have like I said, even with like suffix, like there's like their stuff that has a low stretch. I'm not using that. I'm using the stuff that's a little bit more spongy, and I've had some luck with that, especially when they're goofy. If I can't, because that's tough when they thump a chatterbait so hard, it's like, raw, set the hook, and sucker. that's what's happening. That blade's popping open and just bait's going out. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought about, obviously I made the move like 2 years ago to like a 736 CB glass, just a glass rod, and I loved it. I couldn't figure out for the longest time why I loved it. I knew that I loved the way that it loaded up. I knew I fish from a kayak a lot, so I like that more forgiving, like you said, parabolic bend, where I like that. It just feels so right when it loads up. But I was missing less fish, and I couldn't really figure out why I was missing less fish. I just knew that it felt right, and I knew that I was getting more fish to the kayak. I was like, all right, this is working for me. But that makes sense. Yeah, that hook, if you're going too aggressive with it and you set that hook too hard with a fast action rod, it probably is just popping it open basically, and it's escaping.
A lot of times, yeah. A lot of times it depends on, what you're throwing. But yeah, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of little things. And I'm not saying I'm right on all of them. Trust me, I have opinions, and it might be completely wrong sometimes, but that's how I feel about it.
That's awesome. Well, I know I've kept you a long time. I have one very last question. So obviously taking this kind of full circle to where we started here. So you seemingly the past couple of years competitively have done almost everything. You've checked a lot off the bucket list. Your resume is very, very long with the accolades there. So what's the next goal for you?
Man, I would love to, I'd love to get a Red Crest trophy. I've been close. I just think you got to keep pushing yourself. Every year, of course, Angler of the Year is always the goal. I think next year, I've looked more now, as I've been successful as well. I've spent more time trying to give back a little bit more now with my time. My family, I still need to spend time with my family. I have a almost a 4-year-old little girl, and then Hudson, he's almost 1. So I want to spend time with them a little bit more when I can. But I think that also with that, my wife and I, we've started like this high school bass shootout thing. We've started that, and that was something that through my 501c, and just really giving back on that side of things. Whether we did a college bass shootout the first year, then we did a high school bass shootout this year, and so we're just sort of planning what we're going to do next year as the schedule is sort of out. And that's something that I enjoy. I enjoy that as well, seeing young anglers and just giving them a little bit of an opportunity, something a little bit different. It's important to me as well. So there's things that change as you get older, and as you mature, and as you sort of like in your mindset changes a little bit. But obviously, I'm never going to stop loving to win. So I mean, I'm my competitive nature. I hate losing at anything. So that'll always stay the same. But it's definitely there's times we think about it a little bit more, and I haven't really sat down. I normally always will sit down at the end of the year, or the end of the year, starting the beginning of the year, and set a goals list of like what I want to achieve. Now you could say, hey, I want to win every tournament and all this stuff too, but I try to make it
within reason.
Goal. Yeah, achievable goal. And try to try to set put one really main goal in mind, whether like this year was Angler of the Year. Like that was like going back to back to me. Like it's so cool. Like so few people have done that. Not only won an Angler of the Year, but then won it back to back. So I'm like, all right, we got to do that somehow. So like that was my number one goal.
Check.
So like I don't even know what I'm gonna. I have to sit down. I haven't really even thought about that much.
That's awesome. Well, where can folks keep up with you? Where can folks find you, what you're working on, where they can keep up with your adventures on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on YouTube quite a bit. We drop quite a bit of YouTube content, just sort of goofing around and having fun. So if you want to see the lighter side of me a little bit more, probably the YouTube side of it is, at least on the vlog side is fun. And then, of course, through social, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. I'm always tinkering around, but YouTube, I have a little bit of fun with it. If you're trying to get some tackle tips or trying to tell me maybe I'm tying a knot wrong, you can just holler at me, comment down below.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it a ton. That is our conversation with the one and only Mr. Jacob Wheeler. Jacob, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.